This is the European History Lecture for Monday, the 6th of December, 2021. As a number of you were absent last week because of state, understand you are expected to have seen or to see in a reasonable amount of time all of the lecture videos that you missed. Also, today is the due date, 3 o'clock, for the case study profile. So hopefully that will be in on time for as many of you as possible. Today we talk about, as you have your notes out, today we talk about the economics of the 18th century. And actually the economics that had developed from the age of exploration through the 18th century, the Enlightenment period. And the economic theory is called mercantilism. What mercantilism is the belief that colonies exist to profit the mother country. The belief that colonies exist to profit the mother country. What's the hoodie for, Haley?
State.
Okay, I'll allow it today. But that the point of economic policy is for the mother country to accumulate gold, and that the point of economic policy is for the mother country to accumulate gold. So mercantilism is the belief that colonies exist to profit the mother country, and that economic policy is about the mother country accruing or acquiring gold. That's what it's about. So, there is a grasping nature to colonial policy in this period that fades as time goes on. Nations often use public-private partnerships. For example, I'm going to write down BEIC. You're going to write down British East India Company. British East India Company. British East India Company. And we're going to pull this back a little bit, please. It's not your fault.
East Indian Company?
British East India Company.
India?
Yes. Raise hand if you have questions. INDIA. India. Now, the British East India Company is probably the best example of a public-private partnership of this type. What it is the government encourages the establishment of a corporation, a for-profit company. And the purpose is to develop colonial territories in the region of India and the East Indies, broadly. What it focuses on is the subcontinent that we today call India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, and with related policy towards Burma. In other words, the area south of the Himalayas that points downward into the Indian Ocean. Private citizens will invest their money in the British East India Company in return for dividends, like stockholders in any other company. If I have a few $1,000s and I want to invest it rather than put it in a savings account, let's say I have a few £1,000 sterling because we're dealing with British money. What I might do is look at the British East India Company as a viable investment. They have their own army, they have their own navy, they have their own sort of government that runs the territories that are involved with them. And the British East India Company sets up colonies for profit, as for-profit ventures. So they've got a good history of establishing control over a region and then setting up economic policy so as to turn a profit for their investors, which is the point of any corporation, to turn a profit for their investors.
What page of the notes are we on?
We are on mercantilism.
Where is that?
It is the page. Let's see.
It's the one after the.
It looks like it's
It's side 6.
Does it start on C?
It's F.
It's F.
Okay.
Right there.
So,
Fantastic.
F,
It was
mercantilism.
the other side of the one that said C.
Looks like this. Look at the bottom,
Oh, okay.
right there. Okay.
So then where do we write
Is
this?
anyone else in doubt? Somewhere around there. It's your responsibility. So nobody else is in doubt as to where to make these notes. Okay, good. Or where we are. So, what people do with the British East India Company is they invest for profit. And it is the British East India Company, largely, that colonizes India and that leads British colonial policy from the Indian Ocean northward to the Himalayan mountains. They're the ones that either bring into alliance native princes, or they conquer territory. They're the ones that fight the French. When Lord Clive at the Battle of Plassey defeats the Mughal of Calcutta, he is operating under a British East India Company flag rather than a British Union Jack. So this is a powerful semi-private, semi-public partnership. And in fact, many of the colonies established in British North America, which later become the United States, were established by the British West India Company. The British West India Company set up for-profit colonies in the Americas, for example, the Sugar Islands of Jamaica, and the tobacco regions of the Carolinas, and the timber regions of New England, and so forth.
Did mainland England ever fear the BEIC?
The British East India Company was definitely under the thumb of the government. There were people in Britain that thought that it might be acting out of control, because kind of it was its own authority. But the British East India Company understood that it could never openly challenge the government. So, to the extent it did its own thing at variance with what certain idealists in England would want, first of all, in the 1700s, those idealists didn't have much power, and secondly, it's the weather. Don't worry about it. Just try not to repeat it constantly. The British East India Company was completely dependent upon the British government for patronage. So that would be biting the hand that feeds it. It would be a bad idea. Okay. So this is all for profit. And this for-profit motive is going to cause problems. First of all, because the government repeatedly intervenes in the economy. One of the things that the mercantile system leads to is an economist named Adam Smith. And Adam Smith writes a book called The Wealth of Nations. So you're writing this down, too, near mercantilism somewhere. Adam Smith, just like it sounds, Adamsmith, The Wealth of Nations. That's his book. The Wealth of Nations. The Wealth of Nations.
What's his last name?
Smith. Raise your hand.
The Wealth.
Shh. So, in The Wealth of Nations, Smith is going to roundly criticize mercantilism as a foolish, grasping, short-sighted, doomed to fail economic principle. Instead, what Smith advocates is what's called the free market, what the commie Karl Marx calls capitalism. But I don't like that term, because it's a term written by a communist who doesn't like the free market. Adam Smith argues that money will follow what is valuable, and that the government need not directly intervene in the economy. In fact, a government that steps away and allows business to do business is going to be better for everyone. Businesses will be more profitable, more investment will be made in developing new products and services, Profit is its own reward, and bankruptcy is its own punishment. You don't need government policy to throttle back or manipulate or massage the economy. In fact, the government is never as smart as business in terms of investment. The government is always behind the times. Lawmaking is a slow and deliberative process. Businesses need to be quick on their feet at innovation and responding to new threats. So, a classic example of this is in the late 1980s, there was a new type of television called digital television. And this was going to replace analog television. But so a number of countries and a number of people in the United States said, well, we should have the government help set up digital television sort of as an infrastructure project. The problem is the digital television technology that they were advocating quickly became obsolete, and there were better digital technology frameworks that business itself was implementing because that's where the profit was. Had the government gotten involved in establishing digital television, it would have done so with obsolete systems, because that's what the law said. It's like government intervening to make sure that the price of hay is reasonable for all the people who use horse and buggy. In the 1920s, when automobiles become the commonplace vehicle of the American people, thanks to Henry Ford and the Model T. Ford. So government policy is never as flexible as private industry at investment policy, at developing new products, so on and so forth. So Smith and his ideas are going to be behind what becomes known as the Industrial Revolution, which we'll talk more about. Mercantile theory, though, is this grasping system. So let's start out with one for-profit aspect of the age of mercantilism, the triangle trade. Let's imagine that we own ships, a ship, a good ship. But we will not name it Lollipop, because that's just bizarre.
Let's name it Jack.
Ship that's called Jack. Well,
Yeah, like Jack Sparrow.
Best entrance in a movie ever.
Yeah.
The idea of our ship is to make profit for the people who invested in building it and buying it. So, what do? Well, what we're going to do is we are going to engage in the triangle trade. We're going to start out in England. And we're going to bring mirrors, clocks, beads, and other finished products from England. The Dutch do the same thing, others, but from England to the Guinea coast of Africa. Now, the Guinea coast is roughly from the area where Africa turns south to the area in Senegal. The Guinea coast is the slave coast. There are half a dozen countries there now, but this area was the source of slaves, West African slaves, that the Europeans bought because the Native Americans made lousy plantation workers. So, you bring a cargo hold filled with finished goods, mirrors, beads, blankets, so on. Do not sell the natives guns. Do not sell the natives booze, because both of those will tend to spoil the natives and make it harder to engage in trade. Now, on the Guinea coast, you sell the finished goods and buy slaves. Who do you buy slaves from? Well, the Portuguese and others, including the mercantile countries of England, France, and so forth, have trading posts on the coast. Now, sometimes you do business over a beach. Sometimes you go to a trading post like Accra, and you do business with local Europeans there. And these Europeans are not families, they're men, they're engaged in commerce. And they buy the finished goods and sell them to the Muslims and to the blacks, and they buy slaves. So who acquires these slaves? Woke historians, revisionist historians, left-wing historians paint a picture of white slave hunters going deep into the African jungle, capturing the poor, innocent black folk. This happened from time to time, but it wasn't the usual model. Europeans had no quinine at that point, which means Europeans easily got smallpox and died if they went into the jungles, because the malarial mosquito carried malaria, which is the sleeping sickness, which Europeans have no way to fight. No, for the most part, Europeans did business with Islamic traders that had penetrated this area around 1000 AD. And they also dealt with local tribal chiefs. And these local tribal chiefs bought and sold slaves. They had bought and sold slaves to one another. Everyone, remember, before the age of industry, uses slaves of one kind or another. In ancient times, and in the case of tribal Africa, these slaves were usually prisoners of war. If you go to war and lose and don't die, you end up becoming a slave for the rest of your life, or for the rest of whatever. What if you want to make deals with these Europeans to get mirrors and beads and other magic items, and you've got people in your tribe that are obnoxious? What to do? What to do? You take the obnoxious people from your tribe and you sell them. They're no longer around, and you make some money. Not bad. Furthermore, what if you have an enemy tribe over the hill? You can work with the Muslims and maybe even some European slave hunters and make arrangements to capture as much of that tribe as you're able to and enslave them all at once. The slave trade could not have worked without black Africans operating with the Islamic trading network that had been set up there and working with native chieftains. So all of this means that the slave trade is a for-profit venture engaged in by whites from Europe, by Islamic traders, and by black Africans. Okay. Load up the slaves. Load them up into your ship. There are two ways. Are you talking without raising your hand being called up? Really, we should know by now. There are two ways of packing your vessel: loose pack and tight pack. Loose pack, let's say we could fit 300 slaves in our cargo hold. Loose pack. What loose pack is you pack slaves on shelves on their backs. They have about this much space above them. They've got about this much space beside them, and you're putting them in the shelves on their backs. But then you can pack them tight pack. Tight pack is you pack the slaves on their sides. And they're going to be on their sides for the most of the journey. With tight pack, you can fit in maybe 450 or 500 slaves, whereas you can only fit in 300 loose pack. But this is a journey of 6 to 8 weeks. It's a long journey. You're going to take the slaves out once every few days to exercise them, but in general terms, they're going to be there on those shelves doing those things. If you do loose pack, you start out with fewer slaves, but a higher proportion of them are going to live through the journey. You're always going to lose some. You toss them to the sharks. But you start out with with fewer, but you end up with a higher proportion surviving. So let's say 80% of the slaves survive loose pack. 80% of 300 is what? Oh, math people. 300 times 0.8.
240.
200 and what?
40.
Thank you, Roberta. You make me sad for American education. Excellent. So, 240 slaves out of 300 are going to make it if you do loose pack out of 300. Okay. Let's say we start out with 440. And we're going to do tight pack. With tight pack, you might lose up to 40% of your people, so maybe even more. So what is 60% of 440? 440 times 0.6. Not going to expect miracles. It's a more complicated calculation. 440 times 4.6. Yes, Sam?
240.
Say it?
240.
Same amount. The same amount. So the question is, how are you going to roll the dice? Yeah.
You definitely want to do loose pack, because if you do tight pack, and this sounds really bad me saying this and all, but if you did tight pack, you're wasting your resources, because now there's less slaves when you come back.
Yeah. You start out also having to feed them with more food. I mean, on the other hand, you want to roll the dice and take a gamble. Maybe you can keep 70 or 80% of your tight pack alive. It's all a question of how hard you're willing to work. And Sam, you say you sound guilty. That's the way our society has intended to make you feel. But the truth is, this is a for-profit business. Understand, the kind of abolitionist fervor that we have today, anti-slavery, all that, is a product of the industrial age. It's a product of the Industrial Revolution. And we call it a moral thing now, but the truth is every single society on the planet kept slaves. Of one kind or another, before we have factories, everyone has a form of slaves. Now, was the slavery identical to what happened in Jamaica, or in the case of the tobacco and later cotton plantations in the southern states of what becomes the United States? No, slavery varies from time to time and from place to place, but it's a universal. Why? Because before machines can do the work, muscles need to, and it's not pleasant. So you create a class of people, either by law or conquest, that are living tools. Their legal status is living tools. They have no more moral standing than a rake or a shovel. Marcus Porcius Cato the Elder, the great Roman statesman, wrote a book on running a plantation profitably. And his talk about slaves is absolutely disgusting and brutal. He talks about wearing slaves out and then basically discarding them in any way you can. Maybe selling them to a glue works where you can, they can kill the slave and take the body and help render it into glue. But slaves are a commodity, like anything else, and you buy and you sell and you use them for profit. That's the way people thought. Am I saying it's good? No. I'm a modern person. I consider slavery to be a great evil. But it is simply wrong, as a historian, to look back at the past with a fervor that blinds you to the realities. It's one thing to say slavery was a morally neutral thing. Very few people today would say that. On the other hand, it's unreasonable to expect 18th century people to see things through a 21st century lens, moral lens. It's simply not reasonable. Yeah.
This is kind of off topic. I don't remember if we talked about it, but I was just wondering what you were If you were following along with Kyle Rittenhouse and everything that happened with this case.
Yeah, I was reasonably happy that what seemed to be a clear case of self-defense was ruled a clear case of self-defense, and that the attempt to interject racial politics into it failed in that case. There are times when it doesn't. That's why people do it, and it's kind of nasty. Will you please close the shades in back? And what I'm going to do now is show you excerpts from a television miniseries from the 1970s. This television miniseries is called Roots. It was first broadcast in 1977, and Roots became, because we only had 3 networks at the time, plus PBS, it became a national sensation. Huge proportion of the American people for 2 weeks watched this story night after night of an African family as it is taken in slavery and brought to the United States and lives under slavery and then through the Civil War and into the age of Reconstruction. We start out in the Gambia River region of West Africa, right about here, where the Mandinka tribe lives. And there is a 14 or 15-year-old boy named Kunta Kinte who is going to be captured. This is a dramatization, but it's going to show you a lot of the factors of the triangle trade and slavery. We'll see some clips today and probably maybe some tomorrow. We'll see how long it takes.